We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week in the off-season, we'll be bringing you breakdowns loosely based on that film study from across the pond in the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Johnny Page. Give him a follow at JohnnyPage9. Johnny, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing very well. We need to start with a little bit of breaking news, Shane, which we didn't even mention. We had about a half-an-hour chat today, pre-podcast. But per Elliott Shaw Parks, Jalen Hurts is one away from tying the training camp interception record, Shane. I tweeted, not sarcastically in the slightest, how will I sleep tonight? So have you been following and tracking Jalen Hurts' interception stats very carefully? Are you nervous if he breaks it? Is it a good omen? Is it a bad omen?
Yeah, I'm thinking...
I think he's 156 attempts without an interception. So breaking news there, Shane, with no hint of sarcasm in my voice in the slightest.
Yeah, I'm thinking about working on an all-22 video based on cell phone footage and doing some EPA charting and things like that. So I'm definitely obviously the Eagles are winning the Super Bowl. Like, Jalen Hurts sets a training camp record. Super Bowl, here we come.
I sort of want him to get picked the first throw tomorrow. I'd also love to know how the record stands, like who's been calculating the training camp interception record. I'm also really hoping that, although I'm joking, Elliott does good training camp work, despite the sort of laughing at this bit. I think he's like now just fully in the bit as well himself. He's just tweeted so much about it, he can't avoid it. I'm really hoping he asks Jalen Hurts at a press conference if he knows about this, because I would love to see Hurts' reaction. So Elliott, if you do ever listen, please do ask Jalen Hurts at training camp, because I would love to see his reaction. That's a great question, Mr. Crockpot. What's his EPA per drop back? That's what we need. We need the stats guys turning up at training camp so we can really find out how well he's been doing. But yeah, I half joke, but it's quite funny how serious some people do take numbers during training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. This is on the back of, I guess it's a 3-episode arc now, where 2 episodes ago, Johnny said that training camp wasn't very important. And then last week we had BLG on to talk about training camp. And now Johnny's leading off with mocking training camp stats again. So, you never know what you're going to get on this show.
You just got to keep the people guessing. There are some things that are useful. Training camp interception records is not something that I follow particularly closely until now. Now I'm all on board. I can't decide what I want, really. I think I want him to get intercepted first throw tomorrow, just so the whole bit is completely irrelevant because he doesn't break the record anyway.
That's like the undefeated team that just needs a loss to get that off their back so they can make a run again.
Yeah, there we go. Right. Have you got anything to say, Shane, before I explain what we're doing today? Anything you wanted to hit at the top of the pod?
No, take it away for us.
Right, so we were deliberating what to do basically on this episode because it's a preseason one, and I said we'll do like a preseason film preview, and as always, I've sort of gone in a different direction, and I'm sort of half doing a preview. But I thought I'd just give a little bit of big picture thought before we begin, Shane, about like the value of preseason. I mean, we are film nerds. We watch the All-22 for every single snap during the season more than once. At least basically every single snap. And I always have a bit of a love-hate relationship with preseason, where I love it for the first 10 minutes and then hate it for the remainder of the preseason. I think there are useful things to glean from preseason. I don't care too much about like big picture schematics. Like, defenses are running pretty vanilla coverages. You're not going to see like a whole lot of like wacky blitzes. But I also think that teams aren't going to practice stuff they're not going to run in the real season. So if the Eagles get under center and start running outside zone play action, I'm like, all right, yeah, it's happening. You're not going to practice running like gap scheme runs like power and counter in the preseason, then never run them in the season. Fangio's not going to rock up and start playing cover 2 man, then never run it at all. So I think whilst there's not a lot of disguise and things are pretty basic, I think there is stuff that film guys can take out of preseason. I don't worry about like run pass ratio, but I do think you can learn a little bit. So I guess what we're going to do today is talk about maybe 3 things each that we are personally going to be looking out for in preseason. So if you are someone that watches preseason closely, Keep a lookout for these 3 things. But again, I don't take preseason film too loosely. Like if a really good player has a bad preseason, I'm not panicking. But I do think there is some things we can learn from preseason. You just got to be a little bit clever with what you are looking for. Do you think that's fair, Shane? Anything you would add in sort of how you view preseason as a whole?
Yeah, ever since the Sam Bradford year, preseason, it's hard to take the results too seriously, but there's certain things you can look for, especially when you're changing coordinators, like you said. So I think there's value in that, and I think there's value in watching fringe players, depth players that are going to play a little bit more and to see how they do, although you do have to remember the quality of competition. And we do have Mr. Crockpot chiming in with some questions here in the chat. We are going to get to a mailbag segment later on the show, if you're watching live, later in the week if you're listening later on audio. So you guys can drop some of those questions, and we'll see if we get to some of those as well. But let's go ahead and dive in here. And Johnny, I'll lead us off with my first one. I think I went a little more like player-based, and Johnny went a little more scheme-based here. So I'll start us off with the first thing that I'm interested in watching is just the offensive line. The Eagles have not had to worry about anything on their offensive line for, it feels like a decade. And now Jason Kelce retires, and so that means that you have 2 changing pieces now because Cam Jurgens moves from right guard to center. You're going to have a new right guard this season, and so that's going to be interesting for me to watch. I want to see Cam Jurgens. I'm confident in his ability to play the position. I don't think you will learn much about like setting protections because teams don't really blitz a lot in the preseason. That's frowned upon. But I want to see him snap the football. I mean, we know he can play offensive line. It's a little different snapping the ball and then popping up to block. So I just want to see Cam Jurgens snap the ball. I want to see how the right guard position looks. Who's going to be that starter? And that's a little tumultuous right now. Tyler Steen was thought of to be the guy, I think, and he had an ankle injury, so he's missed some time in training camp. Mekhi Becton played some at right guard, but then he got sick and has missed some practice. So I'm interested to see who gets a shot at right guard and how they look. And I want to see who the backup center is. You're not going to see Cam Jurgens playing in the 4th quarter of a preseason game. You're probably not going to see him playing in the 2nd quarter of a preseason game. And so is it going to be Matt Hennessy? Is it going to be Nick Gates? Who are the Eagles looking at for that backup center? Because although Jason Kelce has been an Iron Man throughout his career, centers get hurt. And that's probably the worst offensive line position to sustain an injury because it is that snap exchange. So that's the first thing I'm looking at in the preseason is just how that offensive line functions as a whole.
Yeah, that's a good one. I won't add too much to it because I think you hit the nail on the head, actually, that you've done more player-based, which is good, and I've done a little bit of scheme-based stuff. I can see Mr. Crockpot chiming in there as well about how he was more worried about centre, and now he might be more worried about right guard. I think probably most Eagles fans agree with you on that as well. I think that's everyone's sort of concern at the moment. I think everyone wanted Tyler Steen just to like run with the job, and we haven't really had that because of the injury. Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think I will be watching the offensive line maybe more closely than normal. I didn't actually think about Cam Jurgens snapping the ball. That's something I haven't seen as a concern because I know he used to play centre. So that's an interesting one to watch as well. I'm mainly going to be looking at right guard. I think like everyone, in particular, a couple of you guys, maybe Trevor Keegan in particular as well. I hope he gets to play because he's someone that I quite liked coming out this year. Right, I'll go to my first one as well. My first one's a bit more niche, as I mentioned, a bit more scheme. So I'm going to go for defensive back communication. And what do I mean by that? Essentially, anyone that knows the Fangio style defense knows that it basically relies on every player communicating with each other. And I won't go into great detail. We are going to have another Fangio episode, hopefully closer to the season as well. And I'm going to do quite a lot of work for Bleeding Green on the defense as well. But when you run like a zone match style, essentially it relies on players passing off receivers depending on where they go, sometimes matching with receivers, sometimes carrying them to another and delivering them. There's a phrase called match, carry, deliver. The fans may be aware of. That's essentially like the Fangio style. Do you match or do you carry and deliver someone to somebody else? I do think that you get a good idea based on how good a coaching staff is by watching backups. And I've always thought this. People are going to hate me when I say this, but when Jonathan Gannon had like the team running really well, and believe it or not, there was a time when the Eagles defense was humming, I just remembered watching the team and you could sort of see whoever played, even when there was an injury, they didn't seem to miss a beat. Like when they ran their zone match, when they ran their cover 4, quads, whatever you want to call it, you could really see that basically whoever was out there basically handling it. And seeing as we are a film podcast, Shane, and some people watch us on YouTube, I've got a couple of clips to show for each of my points this week. So I've got an old clip of mine, actually. I think this is from possibly the 2022 season. I don't even know how old it is, or maybe it was from last year. This is an example of what we call like a tricks call. And if you just go back to the start, Shane, very, very quickly, at the beginning, if you pause it here, now technically here at the start, we had like two receivers on one side. The Eagles, I believe, on this one are in their standard like sort of cover format. It can be hard to tell because it depends on sort of what happens post snap, etc. It's possible they're in quarter half here. But what I think is interesting is the second that the Giants motion this third receiver out post snap, this then means the Eagles will signal like a trick call. And what that trick call does is it means that the weak side safety, who in this case is Reed Blankenship, has to then watch out for any crossing routes coming over to his side of the field. And the cornerback on the weak side as well, I believe it's James Bradbury here, ends up in what we call Meg, man anywhere he goes coverage. And the reason why I mention this as an example of communication is that this has to be done on the fly, because basically this call is made post snap because the Giants only actually get to that free receiver side post, basically just after the snap has gone. And you can see they play it perfectly here. James Bradbury stays in coverage of his man all the way over across the formation, and Reed Blankenship picks up the deep crossing route perfectly. I'm not going to spend long on this because it's not relevant to preseason, but I'm throwing it in there just an example of how this defense relies on communication being solid. And although there might not be starters in there the whole time, I think we will see quite a lot of good defensive backs play because the Eagles' depth is pretty solid. And although we might not see a lot of rotation and disguised coverage, I think you're going to see some cover 4, some quads. I expect you to see maybe a little bit of cover 6 or cover 8, quarter half, or half quarter. And I think it's just something to watch out for is how does the defensive sort of backfield look communication-wise. That's something I'll be looking out for this preseason.
Yeah, any communication would be a little better than what we saw last year. That appears to be from the 2022 playoff game against the Giants, because I think that's TJ Edwards out there.
I think I'm right in saying that Bernard Wilson would have been the defensive backs coach at the time.
Yes.
And he has basically gone on to have a really good career. And that does not surprise me in the slightest, because when you watch the Eagles defensive backs in the 2022 season, I was impressed every single week. And I do think that's something you can see. So, yeah, I'll make that my first point.
All right, good stuff. Yeah, I'll go on to my second player to watch. It's Will Shipley. There's always a little bit of a rookie shine with guys you haven't seen Will Shipley play at the NFL level. And I do think you'll see Shipley a decent amount in the regular season. I want to see how he looks as a runner. I mean, we talked about when we did our Will Shipley film review that he showed great vision in college, particularly on outside zone concepts, and we think we're going to see outside zone a lot and the boot action off of that. Is that going to translate to the NFL level? Because, you know, if you want Shipley to have a role in year one, he needs to look good against backups. And that doesn't always mean ripping off large gains. Remember, he's going to be running behind a backup offensive line. But I want to see the vision translate. I want to see him hit the right holes decisively. And then the second thing I want to see from him is, has he improved in pass protection? Because he wasn't very good in pass protection in college. And if you want to get on the field in the NFL, you have to be able to pass protect, particularly for someone like Kellen Moore, who will keep his backs in to pass protect against the blitz. So we know he's good as a receiver out of the backfield. We know his vision was good in college. I want to see that translate. But more than anything, I want to see him have some good reps in pass protection that makes you think you can trust him on the field in year one.
Yeah, that's a good shout. Did you see, I think it was Sirianni who compared him to Danny Woodhead the other day?
I did not see that.
No, yeah, he compared, I think it was Sirianni who compared him. It was one of the Eagles coaching staff who said they remind him of a sort of young Danny Woodhead. And I thought that was a really interesting comparison, because Woodhead was a really good sort of third down back. And in fact, we might get back to this later on with a Q&A, because I know that somebody mentioned about running back rotation. And I think Shipley will play. He seems like he's going to have a role. It appears he's had a good training camp. But like you, I did see a tweet recently about the Kobe Dean blowing him up on a blitz. And if you cannot survive in pass protection, I don't think that the Eagles coaching staff will trust you a lot, especially when I think they've got a very good pass protector in Barkley. And also we know that they like Kenny Gainwell. Right, I'll move on to my second one. Again, taking a little bit of a schematic, big picture approach. I want to see, I don't care who the quarterback is, whether it's Hurts, Pickett, McKee, Tanner McKee. Is it Tanner McKee or?
Tanner McKee.
McKee, that's his name. Yep, and I want to see throws to the middle of the field, something that is close to our heart because we haven't seen a lot of it, Shane, breaking down film the past few years. And I think this has been a Jalen Hurts issue, but I also think it's been a schematic issue as well. We've seen mobile quarterbacks in general actually sometimes struggle with middle of the field throws, especially quarterbacks who are a little bit careful with the football. This in comparison to Dak, who Kellen Moore has coached, and Herbert, who Moore has coached, who love throwing these sort of in-breaking routes. So I've got a couple of examples for those film guys who want to maybe take a look. So the first one I've got, Shane, is from an account called Pace and Space on Twitter, and it's an example of dagger. You could also call this post dig. A lot of times in football, the sort of words are similar. So I think in dagger, this guy would run a clear vertical, which you've drawn on the screen now, and then the outside guy runs a deep in. I think in this example, the slot receiver actually runs like a post, which is why some film guys will call it post dig, but some film guys will still call it dagger because it's still the basic premise. Nothing fancy about this. If you listen to the show for a while, you know how this goes. But it's one concept that I think is a staple of pretty much every offense in the NFL pretty much today. And I imagine you'll see some reps of dagger. The Eagles have run it heavily under Jalen Hurts' career, but we haven't often seen that deep in be thrown. And the second example I really like because I searched through Twitter to find some old Kellen Moore clips. And the second example, Shane, that I sent you is from Samuel Gold on Twitter, who is an incredibly good film guy that I followed for years. And he posted this wonderful little breakdown of something that we've spoken about with Kellen Moore before. This is going back a long time, Shane, because you can see Jason Witten's name written down. So you know we're going back a while. But this is a very simple backside dig concept. And this is a really, really good throw on time. And this is not something that we've seen a lot from Jalen Hurts, but I think something that you can imagine Kellen Moore doing with AJ Brown. If people can remember our Kellen Moore breakdown, if you were listening to us a few months ago, I said that one thing he does is he loves to isolate the basically backside receiver. In the Eagles' case, would probably be AJ Brown, and essentially isolate him opposite trips, so opposite the free wide receiver formation. And this is just a really nice example of a really good in motion sort of ball comes out exactly when it should, hit the drop and throw it. Timing's perfect. I don't care who the quarterback is for the Eagles. I would like to see some middle of the field throws this year in preseason. I don't want to just see like sort of flood concepts or vertical shots as much as we love them. And I'm going to love it if they do play Hurts and AJ Brown and they connect on a 50-yard bomb. It will be awesome. But the scheme nerd in me wants to see a few throws to the middle of the field. So that is something I will be looking out for. And there's just two concepts or two different ways the Eagles could get to some more middle of the field throws as well.
All right. Yeah, that was one of the things I remember talking about personally when the Eagles traded for A.J. Brown, was that they put something in place to figure out if Jalen Hurts could throw middle of the field, because A.J. Brown's one of the best receivers in the league at that backside dig. And you didn't see it a ton in the Super Bowl year. You saw it definitely more than last year. But everything else was working, and then they sort of went away from it. The Kellen Moore offense is going to build in more of those reads, and so I'll be very interested to see, if Hurts will get to them and if Hurts will hit them. And I don't think we'll see that a lot in the preseason, but we'll get to see a look at some of the concepts. Because like you said, I don't think Hurts is going to play much. I don't think Brown will play much, but we'll get to see Tanner McKee, Kenny Pickett run some of those concepts if they're in the playbook, and I feel very confident they will be.
Yeah, as we said, it's not really about individuals, but there's no point practicing like a play like, I don't know, dagger, or I had a few other plays I could have mentioned here, but any other concepts. Like, there's no point practicing whatever concept you want and then never running it in the season. Like, you're going to practice concepts you're going to run. The difference in preseason is you won't disguise the way you run it. So in the season, you might run the same concept. You might run it out of 4 different formations. You might run it with motion. Whereas in preseason, you might run it from like the same look every time. You don't really care about disguising what you're going to do. If anything, you don't really want to give defensive coordinators the way that you're going to run it in the season, but you can still run the same concepts. There's only so many concepts you can run in the NFL, and there's a lot of plays to get through. So you're going to run the same plays a lot, the same sort of concepts a lot. But I think in preseason, you're less worried about disguising it. But I still think if they're running a concept in preseason, I maintain that the reason why they're doing it. So you will probably see it at some point in the regular season as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a quick comment here that we'll go to before we go to our last points, asking about our overall take on Kellen Moore's play calling in the NFL. Is it overrated, underrated? Is it just about right? I'll say that the thing that is concerning in my opinion at times about Kellen Moore as a play caller, I think fits perfectly for the Eagles in that I think his run game sometimes isn't designed the best and it lacks a little bit of creativity. And so that's one of the things that I think is nice about the Eagles is you're going to pair him up with Jeff Stoutland, who's a run game coordinator and does a phenomenal job at that. I think there's moments that Kellen Moore tries to get a little too cute with things. What was it? Reverse or flea flicker into tight end screen on 2nd and 1 from our breakdown of a drive for the Chargers last year comes to mind. But overall, I really like what I've seen from Kellen Moore over the years, and I'm excited about it. And we'll see how he's able to adapt to having a mobile quarterback, which he's never really had before. And then also, I mean, it's fair to say that every quarterback has weaknesses, and one of Jalen Hurts' weaknesses has been throwing middle of field and quick progressions post snap. And that's something Kellen Moore hasn't had to deal with before. So he hasn't had a quarterback with the strength of mobility that Hurts has in Dak or Justin Herbert. And he hasn't had a quarterback with some of those weaknesses over the middle of field or through quick progressions like he will maybe have with Jalen Hurts. So I'm interested to see how that scheme adapts given a new style of quarterback.
Yeah, he said as well online that there's a general narrative. I think he's overrated. And I think that might be fair as well, as in like from what I see online. I think he's probably underrated. Like when you go back and look at the offenses he's run, they basically all been really successful except for the Chargers offense last year, and they were trying to run out receivers that were either too old or sadly not very good in Quinton Johnson. And I think that when you look back at actually his overall like career arc, if you look at what he's done with the Cowboys, the offense was consistently just really good. Like if you want to just take a pure stats perspective look at it, his offenses were basically routinely awesome. And I know you can talk about how good Dak Prescott is sort of before the snap, and Dak is one of the most cerebral quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think obviously quarterbacks can make coordinators look better than maybe they are, and it's very hard to tell who sort of deserves credit. But that's just part of the conundrum of the NFL is separating quarterbacks from their coaching staff. I think if you just look at it purely like stats wise, and whenever the film I've looked at him, I think he's got a good idea of sequencing. I think you mentioned him getting too cute. I think that is true. I think sometimes he can maybe rely on dink and dunk a little bit. I've seen at times, but that is also, again, a feature of Justin Herbert as a quarterback is the way he likes to play. So it can be tricky to separate quarterbacks from their coaching staff. But overall, from what I've seen, I think he looks like a very solid play caller. And as someone who's watched him a hell of a lot, I'm very happy that the Eagles have got him this upcoming season.
All right, let's get into our final points of what we're looking for in the preseason. For me, it's looking at Nolan Smith. I want to see how Nolan Smith is used. I don't expect Nolan Smith to be playing off-ball linebacker. I expect him to be an edge rusher. However, we have noted that Vic Fangio often likes to rush a linebacker and drop an edge out into coverage. And so I think Nolan Smith will end up in coverage some. I think every edge, Bryce Huff is going to end up in coverage some. Josh Sweat is going to end up in coverage some. And it's not because they're great at coverage. It's throwing them something they don't expect. And so you want him to be able to do that competently. I will try not to come on this podcast and yell about it after a week 1 game when Nolan Smith gives up a 20-yard reception or something like that. But I do want to see how he's used. And I want to see, does he show a pass rush plan? Because we've talked about it before. Last year it was bend around the edge, and if that doesn't work, there's nothing. Maybe we try to power rush, and that's not a good idea because he's so small to begin with. I want to see him throw a pass rush counter move, and BLG I think last week talked about he had some good reps, but it was against Aneem Danquah, who's not probably going to make this roster. So I want to see Nolan Smith probably going to get a lot of reps in the preseason. I want to see him going against a team's starting tackle or a top backup tackle. And I want to see him not just run around him, but I want to see some counter moves. So show me one counter move, and I'm going to hop on the Nolan Smith hype train for this season.
Yeah, you can tell we're on the same page because this was actually one of mine as well. Stain. Oh my goodness, I can't talk. That Shane stole. Random tongue twister there before the show because I wanted to mention Nolan Smith as well as my 3 as well. I was going to throw in Bryce Huff as well, a little bonus one. I'm interested to see both of them. I want to see Bryce Huff on early downs. I want to see like a team run straight at him, basically. And I want to see him take on an offensive tackle in run defense. And yeah, Nolan Smith's going to be probably one of the top defensive players that I'll be looking out for. because as I said, you can really get an idea if we see a counter move. I know you're going to be tweeting that immediately as it happens, because I think that's going to be one of the things that fans are looking out for in general. But I would also throw out Bryce Huff as well, with just in general, like looking at edge, and in particular Bryce Huff on early downs. Right, I'm going to get into my third one. This was my favorite one, so I wanted to end with it. Sorry, did you want to go throw something in there first? Yep.
Oh, I was just going to say a good producer would just like get rid of that little spot where you were tongue-tied, but I'm going to leave that in there, and I might clip it and throw it on Twitter. So,
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think we've got about that point that you are going to do everything you can to put some stupid stuff out there online. This is the problem with doing a podcast and not doing any work and having someone do the work. So there's been a ton of talk about Johnny Wilson, which is awesome. And I think the Eagles are going to be really happy at the moment based on when they took him in the 5th round. And I really liked him I liked him pre-draft. I had him around round 3 to 4, but I had him in like the same group of guys that went quite significantly above him. People like Jalen Polk and it was Javon Baker, both to the Patriots actually. And I thought he was a good receiver. And there were reasons why I really like him schematically. Like, it's a bit boring to talk about the size, but it gives you a couple of advantages. And rather than talk about Johnny Wilson, Shane, because people are going to think I'm going to come on here and mention him in the receiving game, I'm going to get really nerdy because I love run game and talk about the benefit that a receiver can have in the run game. And I'm going to do this starting with a quote from someone that is a very, very big fan of I'm a very big fan of, is someone that Eagles fans don't like because he's the head coach of the Rams, and the Eagles have had some sort of close run-ins with him. But I'm a huge fan of Sean McVay. I think he's a little arrogant, as all great head coaches should be, because they're very, very good. And he was on the Athletic Football podcast the other day with Robert Mays, and I listened, and it's a great listen for anyone who's interested in like the culture of sports. He didn't talk too much about schematics, but he threw out this one quote when talking about Puka Nacua, who everyone knows last year was an absolute superstar receiver, and his fantasy numbers were ridiculous. But McVay didn't really rave about him as a receiver. The exact quote he gave, Shane, was, "We're running 12 personnel plays out of 11 because of him." And I thought that was a really interesting quote, basically implying that they can do stuff in the run game that, if you're not sure what that means, 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, they're running it out of 11. And the benefit, obviously, is that when you run it out of 11, no defense is ever going to play base. They're going to play nickel every time. So you're going to get 3 cornerbacks or 5 defensive backs on the field. So I've got some great examples of Puka Nacua in the run game from, funny enough, Robert Mays' old podcast host, Nate Tice. Nate Tice talked about duo. Now, if you're an Eagles fan who's watched a lot of Eagles film, you probably aren't too familiar with duo because we don't run it a lot, but this is something that Kellen Moore has run in the past. So it is possible that this is something the Eagles will run this year as well. I'm not going to talk too much about duo. I want actually the clips just to look at what Nacua can do, and I want to talk about what Johnny Wilson can potentially do as a big slot receiver as well. So I think I gave you a couple of clips, Shane, if you just pause it at the start. Very quickly. I'm echoing, Shane.
Oh, I don't hear an echo.
Hopefully that's if anyone's in the chat, let me know if I am suddenly echoing on your end. We'll clean it up. So I'm going to try and talk it and ignore myself, like doubling up on the echo. So basically, when you look at Puka Nacua here. Oh,
hold on. Let me like redo the screen share and see if that gets rid of the echo.
Yeah, okay. I'm echoing. I knew I was. It must have been.
Well,
something.
no, I can't hear it, but I was just seeing if it'll get rid of it for you, so it doesn't mess.
No, it's fine. Someone's commented saying we are. Thank you for that, Andrew. We'll sort that out in post production. So anyway, we'll delete that segment, or we'll leave it in just to laugh at me even more. So either way, if one of me wasn't enough, you had 2 for a few minutes there. Also, I'm so glad someone else said I was echoing. So Andrew, thank you, because me trying to do any analysis, hearing myself back was absolutely impossible. So I was about to completely lose all trail of thought. So essentially what's happening here is in duo, it's a very easy run play to spot because you will always see you'll get 2 double teams at the point of attack. So you'll end up with like a center guard and guard tackle double teaming the 2 defensive tackles. Now, what that means is, a little bit technical here, but the tight end, you always run duo with a tight end, and you always run it to the tight end side because you need a tight end to take the defensive end. Now, this is where things get fun because basically What a lot of teams will do is they will basically sort of almost like use the tight end to take the C gap. The Rams do it a little bit differently. They make the tight end block on the sort of like on the edge, I guess, and they use Nakua because he's so good to actually block the C gap for them. Now, the reason why I like this is because I'm going to go back to that quote again. We're running 12 personnel plays out of 11. When you look at where Puka Nakua is standing here, Shane, he's basically a tight end. Like, he's so condensed. The difference is, if this was a tight end, two things will happen. Number one, there's probably not a slot cornerback lined up straight over him. It's probably a linebacker. And the other thing is, we've spoke about this a lot on the pod when I speak about 12 personnel that I really like. It doesn't work unless you are a receiving threat. Because if you are not a receiving threat, the defense will simply not basically treat you as a proper tight end. So Puka Nakua is obviously a receiving threat. So there's no way any team in the NFL will ever line up in base against three wide receivers. Like, it never, ever, ever happens. So basically, the Rams can run this look 500 times, and they are guaranteed to get a defensive back over Puka Nakua every single time, because no one is ever lining up with a linebacker over Puka Nakua. Now, if you roll a play here, Shane, look at what Nakua does here on duo. He basically jumps into the C gap, and he completely takes out the defensive back, and it ends up basically being a nice gain. That's only one clip. So if you're thinking nothing too special, this is just once. Once you've played this through, Shane, if you just whack on the other two in the thread that I sent you as well, and no rush, I know I'm just shouting at Shane to do things here. Look how good Puka Nakua is at blocking here. Now, this is not a Puka Nakua podcast. This is talking about Johnny Wilson. But the reason why I'm showing these clips is because I wanted to give the audience basically an insight into the value of a run blocking wide receiver. Like, it's huge. If you can get a wide receiver that can block, and let's be honest, Shane, top receivers aren't doing what Puka Nakua is doing here and running it. Like, AJ Brown is a big guy who's a good run blocking receiver because he's quite big. You're not asking AJ Brown to do this. Like, AJ Brown is enough on his plate as a number one receiver. You're then not going to ask him to come inside and to block like defensive backs in the C gap. Like, AJ Brown's looking at you going, that's not really what I want to do. You're risking a few things. Devontae Smith simply isn't big enough to do this. This is my favorite one. Like, that's such a good block, and it leads to a massive play. Now, Puka Nakua is 6'2" and 212 pounds. Johnny Wilson is 6'6" and 231 pounds. So if Johnny Wilson can actually add something as a receiving threat in the wide receiver free, and he's good enough to separate, then that's going to be such an advantage for the Eagles in their run game. A really interesting quote here, by the way, while I'm talking from Eagles Eric, who said that Lions were the only team in the NFL last year who did run some 4-3 against 11 personnel. That's really interesting because it rarely happens. And I'm guessing they did it, Eric, against certain teams who basically they thought they were essentially running 11 personnel, but they were going to run out of it. So, for example, Shane, if Johnny Wilson is horrendous as a receiver and he just can't separate and there's no juice there, well, teams aren't going to play like a good defensive back against him. You'd put a safety down. You'd end up playing like big nickel instead. So this relies on Johnny Wilson being able to separate. But I wanted to throw this in there, and I'm not expecting actually this. I mean, you might, if you see it in preseason, then oh my goodness, tweet me. I'm quoting this up. This is going all over social. So if the Eagles run duo with Johnny Wilson, I'm not expecting that. But I'm throwing it in there as like a little preseason thing that when Johnny Wilson's on the field, don't just watch him receiving. Also watch his run blocking, because you don't get many 6'6", 231 pound receivers in the NFL who can separate and play. And you also don't get a lot of them as a wide receiver free, whereas the Eagles are quite unique because their top two are just obviously their top two. So something I'm going to be looking out for, a little bit of a niche take there, but I want to see the Eagles, and this is not just a preseason take, this is a general like Johnny Wilson film take as well, is that I love that quote from McVay. We're running 12 personnel plays out of 11. That's how I'm looking at Johnny Wilson now, because I am buying the camp hype. Like, I'm seeing a lot of it, and it seems like he's really turning up and performing well. And we talk a lot, and I think I'm the same. I throw it in articles. I just throw it out there like, oh, it's a blocking wide receiver. I want to do a little bit on the advantage of having a good blocking wide receiver. I'm not just talking like standing outside that when the play comes to him, he's blocking the cornerback. I'm talking about Puka Nakua being like a legitimate part of why the Rams run game was so successful last year. And going back to that podcast, McVay basically said that was always the plan. Like, I think what blew McVay away was how good he was as a receiver. And I don't think anyone expected him to end up with the yardage that he did last year. But I think that was not a surprise to McVay. Like, he spoke openly on the podcast about the plan was to use him as a run blocker a lot. Like they saw something on film that they really liked, and you can see Johnny Wilson like absolutely dominate some guys at the point of attack in college. Like I had some clips up from my Bleeding Green article. So that is something that's a little bit niche, but something that I'm looking forward to seeing, because I think Johnny Wilson will get a bit of playing time, and I don't just want to see him receiving. I want to see him out there run blocking as well, because if he can be a force in the run game, you know me, Shane, I love run game, throwing out a receiver who can actually really get involved in run concepts, because AJ Brown and Devontae Smith cannot. They're almost too good to risk in some ways getting involved the way the Eagles use them. So having like a 6'6", 231 guy who can double up in the run game as well will be really good to see. So I'll end sort of part one, unless there's anything you wanted to add with that take on Johnny Wilson.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like what you're saying is that Johnny Wilson is maybe bigger and better than George Kittle. Is that right?
I knew where you were going as you were talking there. Yeah, I'm saying nothing more on the George Kittle, but I mean, the training camp reports have been good. People are going to think I love Johnny Wilson. I actually said this in my article as well. I hate receivers like Johnny Wilson. I hated Devin Funchess. I hated Kelvin Benjamin. I hate receivers that are just big and can't run. But I think Johnny Wilson can run. And I think his problem is just he can't catch, which as of late, I haven't read many problems that he can't catch in training camp. So if he can get like pretty good hands, like you've got a 6'6" guy who runs pretty well for his size, can run block and can catch, like sign me up. Like in the 5th round as well. He doesn't need to play every snap, but he can definitely give you a little bit more in the run game.
I think that for years the Eagles have struggled to get a tight end too that could catch. Like the last time they had a tight end too that could catch was Dallas Goedert when Zach Ertz was still here. And they've tried Albert O, they've tried Grant Calcaterra, they've tried Tyree Jackson, they've tried a lot of guys, and it just hasn't worked. And what you said is very accurate, that 12 personnel only works if the second tight end is also a receiving threat. And so the Eagles have been unable to find that. Maybe, just maybe in Johnny Wilson, they can find a wide receiver 3 who can block. And you can sort of get, 11 and a half personnel. Maybe we'll term a new term there. Maybe we'll call it 11 and a half personnel. But that would certainly be an interesting tool to see them use throughout the season. So I hope we see that. I hope you're right. Maybe we can nerd out about the run game together with Johnny Wilson.
Yeah, just really quickly, I like the idea of 11 and a half. I maintain, and I have my own sort of, I guess, things that I like to see. Like, I love 12 personnel. Some people always ask me, like, why, if you love 12 personnel so much, does everyone not run it? And it's because it's so hard. There's not 32 good starting tight ends in the league, let alone having like 2 of them on every team, and then one of them gets injured and you can't do it. And it only works. I should get this like on the wall behind me if I had the fancy pictures like you do. And it should say that 12 personnel only works if both tight ends are really good at both things. If one can't block, it doesn't work. Like Kyle Pitts. When the Falcons run 12 personnel with Kyle Pitts, no one's playing base on Kyle Pitts. Like, Kyle Pitts is he's basically a big receiver. Like, he might line up as a tight end, but defenses don't treat him like a tight end. What made Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert really good and was both of them can block. And Zach Ertz was not the best blocker, but he was willing. You go back to the old school, like Gronk and Hernandez days, like unbelievable. Both can block, both can catch. What do you do against them? Teams that run 12 personnel really well, it's really hard to get 2. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely might be the best 2 in the league currently. Both can block, both can catch. But even then, Likely's much more of a receiver. Like, for those wondering, why don't teams do it so much? If I always go on about it, it's because it is so, so hard. And I think Eagles Eric just chimed in as well before we get to the mailbag. We'll start off with a pre-mailbag question then about preferring Grant Calcaterra. Because Goddard is so good at blocking. And at the moment, there seems to be a lot of hype around Grant Calcaterra. And I think that's a fair point, because I think almost like when you play Grant Calcaterra, you're basically playing another receiver. And I think the same is true of Albert O. I think the difference is Albert O just really, really doesn't show anything as a blocker, whereas Dallas Goedert is an unbelievably good blocker. So I think in some ways, Goddard is such a good run blocker. I think as an offensive coordinator, you're probably trying to go after a receiver who is more of a tight end who is more of a receiving threat than a straight up blocker, because you've already got Dallas Goedert there. But personally, I want the tight end 2 to be someone that can do both. And I don't think the Eagles have him on the roster right now, which is why I think that we're going to see a lot of 11 personnel, because I think the Eagles have got more. You look at just how much deeper teams are at wide receiver. I think you could argue that the Eagles have got like 3 or 4 more exciting wide receiver 3 options than they have at tight end 2. It's just really hard to find good tight ends. So yeah, should we leave it there with part one, Shane? And we'll get into some of the mailbag stuff we've got now before I geek out even more about a guy who may not even play very much and a run concept we may not even see.
Yes, I think that sounds good. So we will go ahead now and transition to the mailbag portion. We put out a mailbag request to our Patreon members, and then we also put it out on Twitter. Reminder, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/ontheshanepage, and we've got some perks that will kick in the season. You get an ad-free podcast feed for our show, so you don't get the ads that are in the regular show. You get access to a Discord where you can just chat with us about football, different things. You get access to these mailbag podcasts once they go behind that paywall. They are currently not, but they will later in the season. You also get to help. You get a little bit of creative control over our film study, because we've talked about, you cannot watch every player when you're watching all 22. And so we'll put up weekly polls for player spotlights, guys that you want us to specifically focus on our all 22 reviews. You also have that direct line to us to suggest show ideas and things like that. And we can build it out with some more additional content that you guys like. So you can check that out. There's a $3 and a $5 a month tier. We certainly appreciate your support there. But without any more salesmanship, let's dive into the mailbag collection or questions that we collected. Our first question came from a guy that's in the chat right now, Eagles Eric. He asked, do you think Pistol will be featured more this year? And I'll take this one first. I'm just going to say yes. In 2023, the Eagles were in shotgun on 87% of their offensive snaps. And that's with a lot of tush pushes. In pistol, they were in pistol on 7% of their snaps. And their pass rate over expectation was negative 18.4%. So when they were in pistol, it was to run. You look at the Chargers last year, and they were in pistol about the same amount of the time, but they were under center on 21% of their snaps. And I don't think you're going to suddenly see Jalen Hurts under center a lot. For a lot of reasons. One, he's never done it. Pistol is still like a similar drop process for him. And number two, being under center as a mobile quarterback sort of nerfs your run ability a bit. I think pistol feels like a nice compromise where you can still get the play action boot rollouts, but you can still also run like read option sorts of things out of the pistol. So I do think you're going to see pistol. I think you'll see a little under center, but I don't think it's going to be a ton. I think you'll primarily see like pistol as a replacement for under center.
Yeah, we will try, and we said off air, we'll try and be quick with the questions, but then some of them are going to be a little bit more detailed than others, and this is a good one, especially as it's a little bit more schematic, so we'll be a little bit more detailed. 100% agree. I think it's almost a dead cert that we'll see more pistol. Pistol basically combines the two, and you pretty much summed it perfectly, Shane. There was actually a clip going around on Twitter that I posted the other day of Jalen Hurts mic'd up, and if you watched it, I think about minute 251, there is literally a pistol play action, and it basically means Hurts still has to turn his back to the defense. He still has to run that boot action, but you basically get the benefit of doing that, but still keeping things a little bit more comfortable for Jalen Hurts. It's almost like the perfect blend of Stoutland and Moore's run game is to run more pistol, because Moore wants to run more under center. Stoutland wants to keep it shotgun based. Well, if you've got two people that have differing ideologies in the room at once, try and find some common ground, and pistol is that common ground. So I think we'll almost certainly see some more. Moving on to the second question, I'll ask if you as well, Shane. I'll see we've got in front of you. You just have a brackets here, Shane. I should have asked you from Daniel. Is this from Twitter or is this from elsewhere?
I don't remember. I don't remember if it came from Twitter or Patreon, but I did try to include names where I thought about it.
Yeah, I should have mentioned actually down the whole salesmanship route. Yeah, please do. $3 a month is not much for Patreon. I know it's very hard. I subscribe to a fair few Patreons myself, and I know it's not easy because there's hundreds out there. But it is good. Discord is good. We had a few people asking us about where to learn a lot of schematic things the other day. We were in the chat giving loads of advice, and it's the easiest way if you want to just have a conversation with us, basically. So anyway, Daniel asked, how would you feel about Jeremiah Trotter getting some legit playing time this season? And I'll go first. I would feel very good about it because I've been a big sort of fan of Trotter. I think he's pretty much plug and play ready. I think if you're happy with the size and you think he can play, then do I think he'll be brilliant? Absolutely not, because it's the Eagles and linebackers and we're destined to fail. But do I think he should be a sort of capable starter? I mean, if Zach Bourne's out there starting at the moment, I see no reason why Jeremiah Trotter Jr. could not overtake Bourne as the season goes along, especially if it feels like the Kobe Dean is maybe out of favour. I do not see him replacing Devin White at all. I think White will play all season long. He's been signed. The Eagles knew what they were getting with Devin White when they signed him, so that shouldn't surprise him if he has a few bad games. But I do think Jeremiah Trotter could absolutely get some legit playing time this year. I think he's pretty much pro ready, I think. How about you, Shane? Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, if we see him play, I hope it's because he's playing really well, not because Zach Bond is playing really poorly. But Zach Bond is making that transition from edge rusher to linebacker, and so we'll see how that goes. We'll see how much he's blitzing while we've got an edge dropping out. Of course, Devin White's a good blitzer. I think all three of these guys are good blitzers. So I'd like to see the rookie go win a job. We'll see, though. I agree a little bit with Mr. Crockpot here that if he's getting on the field early, it probably indicates trouble, whether it be injury or somebody like Zach Bond performing really poorly. But from a cognitive standpoint, Trotter Jr. should be ready to go. It's just concerns about size, really, for me with him.
Yep, I'm the same. Right, do you want to move on? Do you want to take the next one?
Yes, so question number 3 came from Jackrabbit Rocks on Twitter and asked, is it possible the reason we're seeing the offense dominate in training camp is that Fangio's scheme is complicated and the kids are still learning? I would say, generally speaking, I think the offense is always an advantage in training camp, especially when the Eagles, even in padded practices, aren't doing live tackling. And so I think the offense operates at an advantage there. A lot of the stats that you'll see come from 7-on-7 where there's not necessarily a big pass rush, or from you see the one-on-one drills where a receiver should beat a cornerback, 70% of the time in one-on-ones because they know their route. The defender doesn't. They have no help. So I think offense is generally at an advantage. I don't think the complexity of the scheme is so much the issue because the Eagles have run a Fangio-based system the last 2 years. The rules are largely the same. But I will say that I think it has more to do with the offense bringing back every starter except Jason Kelsey and Quez Watkins, which, let's be honest, was an addition by subtraction situation. While the defense is replacing both linebackers, they're replacing Fletcher Cox, replacing Hassan Reddick, they're replacing 2 cornerbacks, and they're replacing a safety. And so there's been a lot more turnover at defense. You got a lot of young guys out there and a lot of new faces, and there's a little more volatility there. So I think it's both of those things working in the offense's favor.
Oh, man, I actually prepped for this show, Shane, and I wrote down everything you just said to answer this question. You basically took the words out of my mouth about the starters coming back and about it's not the scheme that's complicated, it's the new players, that it's relationships, it's rookies in the secondary. So I haven't really got a great deal to add. The only thing I would say is I think defense in football is heavily reliant on aggression as well and physicality, flying to the football, tough defense. Like, you can't do that in training camp. Like, you can show a little bit of aggression, but you can't really. Offenses are designed to win in training camp. And if an offense is not having a good training camp, I always care a lot more than a defense. Moving on to question 4, we sort of mentioned this already, so I'll probably keep it quick. It's from JC. How worried should we be about right guard? And what are the chances Harry will make a move before week 1? I think we've already answered that. I feel like on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm sort of edging towards a 6 and a 7. I'm a little bit worried about right guard, but I have said in the past that I feel like if you've got Lane Johnson there and you've got Cam Jurgens there, I'm not too worried about it because I think you can make do with one sort of average starter. I think the chances of a move before week 1, I would be surprised personally. I think they've got enough there to get by unless there's like a massive injury bug. I think if you have to play, at the end of the day, if they sign Becton and they're giving him reps there, they obviously think he can do it. I think you've got Cam Jurgens, then you've got Matt Hennessy, who you could even play at centre and move Jurgens back to right guard if you really wanted. And lastly, you have, who have I not mentioned? Trevor Keegan. Did I forget someone as well? Yeah, Trevor Keegan I didn't mention. So you got like 4 guys there. So I think it's unlikely they make a move for a guard. If there's like a vet laying out there and Steen's injury is more serious than we think, then maybe. But I highly doubt that. That's before week 1. I expect that will come like in the season if there's an injury. What about you?
Yeah, I'm not worried. It is a weak spot. But at the end of the day, I've said this before, but Eagles fans are really hyper-focused on their team. And every team's like this, but and they just think, oh man, we don't have a right guard. And if that's your biggest problem as an offense, is who's going to play right guard next to your Hall of Fame right tackle, you're in a pretty good spot, because most teams have major question marks at multiple spots on their offensive line. They also don't have a wide receiver duo as good as AJ and Devontae. They don't have a running back like Saquon Barkley. There's a lot of teams with big quarterback questions. And so, at the end of the day, is it a weak spot? Yes. Am I worried about it? I wouldn't say I'm worried about it. I mean, if you tell me that the Eagles go into Brazil week 1 and they just get blown up by the defense, and you ask me what happened, I would guess the offensive line was the issue, right? I mean, it is the weak spot, but it's not something I'm overly concerned about.
Yep, I would agree. Before you go to question 5, Shane, just very quickly, nice little selfish question from Mr. Crockpot, just for me, asking me about like my plans this year in terms of writing. Yeah, it'd be the same as always. I will do a Twitter thread, hopefully the day after the game and 2 days after the game, and I will be writing for Bleeding Green Nation unless BLG doesn't like my work anymore. As far as I'm aware, I'm still writing there, so I'll be writing weekly offense and defensive breakdowns after every single game. So yeah, they'll be the same as usual, basically. Right. I'll take.
I really like the sweet graphics you include in those too. Those are really nice.
Yeah, there we go. Basically, anything I do that's not a dodgy film filmed on my phone from Twitter is from Shane, because time is of the essence, especially with the amount of work I do. So I'm not into the fancy graphics. Anything that has any sort of any element of time that's not just watching the film, it will come from Shane and not from me. Right. Let's go again. Question 5 from Scott. We actually sort of answered this at the start as well, very briefly. What's your take on the training camps reports about Jalen's performance? Well, obviously, it's historic. I mean, it's nearly historic. So, as we know, MVP incoming, Super Bowl, breaking records because he doesn't throw any interceptions. And he says, is there some element of the coach is giving him easy routes, relying less on his decision-making? I mean, second half of the question, Scott, I mean, being honest, without being there, we've got no idea, but I've not seen any coaches mention it being a safe or conservative offense. In fact, Elliott Shaw-Parks has spoken about the fact that while he's been judging him in terms of like his interception, he's mentioned he hasn't just been checking it down. It's not just been screens. It's been a lot down the field. We've seen some clips of down the field throws as well. So my take on it is that he's playing well. Like, I don't want to get too detailed into it because I haven't seen it yet, but the take on it is I think it's been about as positive as you can hope. From everything I read, it seems like he has got the offense and he's understanding what Kellen Moore wants to do. And that is huge because I think it's going to be a very different offense and it's one he's not used to. So my take on the training camp reports are I'm very, very pleasantly happy about them, because my big concern going in this year was, would Jalen Hurts sort of adjust well to Kellen Moore being the OC and a bit more of a complicated offense? And who knows what the actual offense is because we haven't seen it. Maybe it is a very simplified Kellen Moore scheme because he knows he doesn't need to be as good schematically because he's got an elite tight end and 2 elite receivers, an elite quarterback and elite running back. So maybe it is a simple scheme. Essentially running it very well. What about you, Shane?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, obviously not being there, I can't imagine it's relying less on decision-making than last year, because so much of the decision-making last year was a binary. Is A.J. Brown one-on-one, do this? Is he not? Do that? Like, there wasn't a lot of progression things happening. And from everything I know of Moore, I expect a more complex offense this year. As for why it's been good, without having been there, all I can rely on is like what BLG said and what he's written in his practice reports, that he's just looked really good. So, it's encouraging. And then again, the aforementioned comments about what training camp actually means, I don't put a ton of stock into it, but I would rather him look good than bad for sure.
Yep, I'm with you. I agree. Should we move on?
Let's do it. The next question came to us from Scratch03 on Twitter. It said, with Nakobe Dean being touted as a stud coming out of college, why do you think he's been struggling to take hold of the starting linebacker position? Also, who is the dark horse, quote, breakout star no one is talking about? I would say on the Nakobe Dean part, the biggest issues are just that he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and which was obviously a concern because he fell to the first round after he was given, or excuse me, he fell to the third round when most guys had a first round grade on him. And then he's just very small, 5th percentile height, 14th percentile weight. I think that was always going to be a bit of a struggle to adjust. It's the same concerns about Trotter, by the way, with his size. And football is a sport where, sometimes we make football too complicated. Big people beat up little people, and little people tend to get hurt. And so I don't know that I can judge much else about Nakobe Dean because we simply haven't seen him play much. And so I can't give a lot of feedback on this is why he's struggled, other than he's just been hurt. And so it's been hard to rely on him.
Yeah, and before I answer on Dean Shane, do you want to give a quick shout out? Do you have a breakout star no one's talking about?
These two questions in one get me because I forgot to even think about that one.
Do you want me to answer and I'll come back to you?
Do it. I'll have one by the time you get done.
Right, there you go. You got about 30 seconds to think of a breakout star, no pressure. I actually went back because this question looked at my Nakobe Dean scouting report, and I sort of hoped that when I wrote about him, I was like, I wasn't the biggest fan, so I could come on here and say, you see, you should have watched his college film closely, but I would be lying because it turns out I really liked his college film. I'll give you a quick summary that I said when I sort of wrote. I always do like an overall summary at the end. I said I expected him to be good, but I thought he was better than I expected him to be when I watched him more closely. I said I've absolutely no doubt there are legitimate injury concerns that have caused him to fall. And I did say I think there are concerns over his size, his tackling, and his ability to cover tight ends down the seam, considering his size. And this probably caused him to fall out of the first round. This is something BLG has mentioned in training camp about his coverage being an issue. I mentioned his athleticism, but I did mention as well, although he struggled in man coverage, he looked good in coverage at times. An excellent blitzer, excellent against the run. But I kept saying here, and I literally sit here, I think Dean should be a full-time starter, and this is quote, and if his body holds up, I think the Eagles have got themselves a steal on in round 3. But I think you can see me talking about here, the injury concerns have been a problem. And it's a really boring excuse to talk about why a player didn't make it. But injuries are massive. You just don't get the reps you need. Linebacker in particular, it's an instinctive position. And if you're not playing consistently, you're just not developing. And I think that's why I just can't have... I worry about Nakobe Dean long term. And before I give you your shade, my breakout star, I'm going to go Milton Williams. I think Milton Williams, to maybe scheme guys, is someone that they already think is really good. To film nerds, they already like him. But I think the general consensus, maybe the national media, hasn't bought on. I think Milton Williams could go nuts this year. I think he could have a really, really good year. I think he's an extremely good player. And I think the fact that Fangio came out this week and said that he tried to trade for him with the Dolphins is a great sign, because that shows that Fangio's on board. He obviously thinks he's a perfect fit for that sort of 4-5 technique role as well. Or a free technique as well. So I think he's going to have a really, really good year. Now you've had a minute to think. Go on then, give us your heavily anticipated breakout player that you've had 1 minute to think about, Shane.
I'll go with Zach Bond. I think he's the guy that he was a Fangio guy. Fangio wanted Zach Bond. There's some comparisons, height, size, athletic profile wise, to Andrew Van Ginkel, who had a breakout last year for the Dolphins under Vic Fangio. So I'll say Zach Bond has a good year, is the quote-unquote breakout star that nobody's talking about much.
That's impressive, Shane, that you managed to spend a minute thinking and just steal Mr. Crockpot's answer from the chat room. So if you didn't see Mr. Crockpot, you can use that against him now in your fellow conversations because you just managed to steal an answer. So we now know that Shane can read the chat. So great breakout star there. Moving on, this one of those fantasy questions, I guess. How do you think running back rotation will look and roles will look from Bang Bang Bird Gang? Lovely name. I think Saquon Barkley. I think the Eagles basically, as a franchise, believe in a running back by committee, but I think you just spent a lot of money on Saquon Barkley and you're going to run him into the ground for 2 years because he's an elite running back. So I think if Barkley's healthy, you're going to give him, 75, 80% of the touches. Is that too high? But I think he could really be like a workhorse back, because I don't care if you believe in a committee, he's a star running back. And the Eagles historically might believe in committees, but they've also never paid a top 5 running back in the NFL. So I think Barkley will take a lot. I think Gainwell will just about edge running back 2. I think Gainwell will out-snap Will Shipley, but I think Gainwell will out-carry Shipley, whereas I think Shipley might have more receiving yards than Gainwell. That would be what I think. But I think you could be looking at a 70, maybe even as high as a 75%, maybe volume to Barkley. What about you, Shane? Am I going too high there?
I had like 70 in mind. I think so. Saquon's your 3 down back. I think Gainwell will spell Saquon and be used in 2-minute situations because we've seen over the years that the Eagles like to use him in 2-minute drill situations. And I think Shipley gets very limited reps. I think Shipley might end up being your kick returner. You can file that away. But I don't expect to see Shipley a lot, especially early in the year. Now, as the year goes on, maybe he proves himself as a pass protector. Not that Gainwell is great at that, and you start to see him a little more. But that's kind of how I see it shaking out.
Yep, fair enough. Let's move on. Let's get through these, and then we'll get to some more random ones to finish off. I like doing a mailbag because I feel like you could just hear a lot of takes in one because we like to waffle. This is a very broad question, so I'm going to try and answer it as concisely as I can. What's the concern with the Eagles roster or staff going into the season? From @BKN_says. Shana, I've answered the first one, so I'll let you start with this one. Concern with roster or staff? Take a pick. You can do one or both, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious concern points, we've mentioned right guard before. I think that's a place that you could convince yourself the Eagles are going to have problems. You could convince yourself that depth could be an issue in a few places. If A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith goes down, where are you at receiver? If Dallas Goedert goes down, where are you at tight end? Of course, every team has these problems, but again, we're more in tune with those issues for our own teams. If you look at defensive tackle, if Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis were to go down, where are you at as a defensive line? So I think there's concerns there, but if you stay away from depth, I would just say the general changing pieces in the secondary for a defense that we did mention before is complex. There's a lot of coverage rules, and you're changing out one of your starting safeties, you're changing out 2 starting cornerbacks, you're changing out all your linebackers. So I would say the back end of the defense and that right guard spot, I guess, are probably the places that you should have concern.
Yep, love it. I will go for, seeing as you did roster, I'll look at staff instead. How do I say this nicely? I'm a little bit concerned about Fangio still. Like, I love the Fangio defense in part. It's pass defense. I really like it, and I'm biased because I love the hire because I've studied it so much. It was just easy for me from a job perspective. I worry about Fangio's run fits a little bit. I worry about the too high shell against the run. I worry about the way the NFL is going, a bit more of a power run game, and I worry about the Eagles having a below average linebacking core. And I worry about the role they're going to put on to Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter to basically be unbelievably good against the run. So I would say my concern is not with Fangio as defensive coordinator. I'm getting a bit specific here, but Fangio's run fits in particular, and sort of the general construct of defense against the run. I can see this Eagles team getting run on a little bit. I'll do 2 for the price of 1. Another question coming in from the chat from Mr. Crockpot asking about if Devin White and the Kobe Dean are best blitzers, which 2 linebackers would you say the best at dropping back? Devin White, in my opinion, is the best in coverage, but without a doubt, I don't think it's close. And I think Eagles X's No chimed in with a chat and said the same. Then it's a fair question. I don't really know who the second one is. Like, I'm not sure you can say with confidence any of the others have particularly excelled dropping into coverage. So my answer would be Devin White and then panic stations for the next one, because I'm not sure who else. Maybe in the Kobe Dean. There's a good comment from Eagles X's No who just posted there about maybe Cooper DeJean as a sub linebacker. I think you could also throw in Sidney Brown there as a sub linebacker as well as a dime safety, maybe dropping into coverage, because the Eagles haven't really got a potentially great other linebacker in coverage. Shane, I'll tell you what, the other question's a bit more fun. So I'm going to skip 9 and go straight to 10 because I think 9's a bit more of a fun question. And then we'll go on to like the fun questions afterwards. This is probably the last, let's say, serious one. What is your opinion of Nick Sirianni as a coach? And this, by the way, a nice, like, easy one to try and be concise about. I believe he's a uniter, but a simplistic X's and O's coach. How can you stay competitive if when Moore leaves to become a head coach? Fantastic question and brilliant phrasing, because basically that's sort of my answer as well. I love Nick Sirianni culture-wise, and I do think culture matters, by the way. Like, it's not all, I mean, we're an X's and O's podcasts, but it is not all X's and O's. Anyone that thinks that is kidding themselves. Like, yes, scheme matters, but oh my goodness, culture matters, and relationships matter, and working with different people and getting different people to communicate with each other. And like, that stuff is massive in sports. I mean, anyone, I can go into an NFL team tomorrow and say, this is how outside zone works. Like, don't get me wrong. But there's other stuff than just, if everyone could just copy Shanahan's offense, they just literally take the playbook and run it. Like, it doesn't work that way. Eagles and Eric Snow stole one of my answers there. Dan Campbell, John Harbour, Jim Harbour. Like it's not just about X's and O's. So the big problem, I really think Nick Sirianni does struggle with the X's and O's. I think there's no doubt about that.
Can I say
think he's a
something real
good
fast?
coach. Yes, go for it. Go for it.
Before we hold Campbell up, he had to reverse a really bad culture, which Nick Sirianni didn't have to do. Also, I wouldn't pass judgment on that until we see him try to make it work after Ben Johnson leaves and they've paid Jared Goff. So I agree. Like, you can have success there. It's the question for me is about sustained success, which Jim Harbaugh is Ravens, right? I always get them mixed up. Anyways, he's obviously been able to do, but I just wanted to address those real quick. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Unless I'm going absolutely mental, someone in the chat saved me. John is the Ravens and Jim is the new guy, right?
Yeah,
with the LA,
the Chargers.
They're both very similar, I guess, in terms of culture guys, should we say? I think he's a really tricky one because the problem is a lot of these X's and O's weaves, like us, Shane, don't make good head coaches. So you don't want like the X's and O's, like who's the Dolphins guy? My mind's gone blank. Mike McDaniel.
Mike McDaniel or McDonald.
Why are we terrible with names today? Chat's gonna love this. People listening are gonna absolutely crack up.
Mike McDaniel, which is he's one of my favorite guys to listen to.
Yeah, but he's a classic like X's and O's guy. Yet he's managed to make it work. Like he's managed to be a head coach, and he's actually quite a good culture guy as well when I hear him talk. So I worry. Basically, you hit the nail on the head. The problem with having a culture guy is that if Kellen Moore's awesome, he's going to leave. But also, like that means maybe you have to be a bit like cautious about who you hire as well. So Kellen Moore might need a couple of years to prove he's a good OC because I wouldn't hire immediately as a head coach because it hasn't worked in the past. Or he's never really taken that step up. Vic Fangio didn't work, for example, as a head coach. So he's quite a safe DC because I don't really worry about Vic Fangio leaving anytime soon. So like, I think you can make it work if you do it in a sensible way. But I agree that like there is a concern. I like Sirianni, but I'd be lying if I said that like if the season doesn't go well, he's the first guy that gets canned. And I do think there is a legitimate situation where if Kellen Moore is absolutely awesome, like you fire Sirianni and promote Moore, but I think that very, very rarely works. What about you, Shane? Anything else you wanted to add on Sirianni there? And then we'll get to some maybe more, some Eagles, some non-Eagles sort of stupid stuff.
Yeah, this may come back to bite me, but I was on the record last year that I would have moved on from Nick Sirianni after last season. I fall pretty firmly in the camp that head coaches should call plays for the sake of continuity when you lose offensive coordinators. Or if they don't, they should be a really good scheme person who is like designing the game plan, and they're just not the one actually calling plays. So when that play caller changes, you've still got the guy scheming everything up. Sirianni's neither of those things. He's not a play caller. And I think we've seen over last year what his scheme is, and it was horrendous. So Sirianni is neither of those guys. And if you're going to be a quote unquote culture guy, which we mentioned, there's successful examples of that, then the culture shouldn't suck as badly as it did last year. And so I don't know what you bring to the table if you're the culture guy, but your team can collapse like that and all that can happen around you. I don't know what you bring to the table in that regard. Now, the players obviously seem to love Sirianni, regardless of, the bill of sale that WIP tries to get you about Hurts not liking Sirianni and things like that. They seem to respect Sirianni. And so, obviously there's something there. You had players speaking out, defending him last year when they very easily, if they didn't like him, could have made that known and he would have been gone. And so there is an element of the culture that's hard to quantify because we can't see it, but it's certainly there in the background. That said, I want my head coach to be a schematic guy on one side of the ball or the other, and I don't really think he is.
Yeah, I think we both agree big picture, don't we? That was the last serious question, partly because it's edging closer to one of those long old shows, and I can feel the belly rumbling, and we've got some good silly questions here. Actually, one more Eagles question, but it's, I guess, an old school one from @4from24. Ignoring personalities, AJ Brown or T.O. I'm too young, and I wasn't watching the NFL properly. I say I'm too young. I mean, I was alive, obviously, during the T.O. era. I just wasn't watching football in the UK. So I've watched all of the video highlights. I've watched the 2004 season with DVD and stuff. I've been reliving it just now with John Stone's Eagle Memories. And I have to say that from everything I see, it's Terrell Owens, isn't it? Am I wrong?
That's a little early. I mean, I was watching football, but I was like 13, so I was watching football from a different perspective. And there's recency bias that probably goes in as well. And definitely go check out Eagles Memories because that's been fun to relive the '04 season with John. So check that out on this feed. But I went back and looked at some of the stats, and A.J. Brown's had the much faster start to his career. In his first 4 years, Terrell Owens only topped 1,000 yards one time. Brown has done it 4 times in 5 years, including back-to-back 1,400-yard seasons. Now, the league has obviously changed in that time, for sure. Owens was taller than Owens was taller than A.J. Brown by almost 2.5 inches, but Brown is heavier and faster. I think, and again, this is not the best question for me to answer, but I think I would take Brown. But I mean, you'd take either one of these guys.
Interesting. Yeah, I have one of my dreams actually. One of my dreams. That makes sense. That's not the word I wanted to use. One of the things I'd like to do is just like a historical account on Twitter that does like old football film. And I want to try and get the all 22 of the '04 season. It's going to be a project of me next year. I might end up emailing very random people in the world to try and get if anyone's listening who happens to have the all 22 saved on like a G drive, let me know. Because I'd like to go and watch some of that '04 season to watch a little bit of McNabb and Terrell Owens. I think I'd take T.O. as someone who's only ever watched highlights for him. I like how these are the fun questions, and Shane starts talking about stats and his height. Like, once a nerd, always a nerd. Like, it's meant to just be a little bit of fun. Like, AJ, and all of a sudden, 2.5 inches bigger. I'm just talking about, like, YouTube highlights I've watched. And I'm taking Terrell Owens. Right, what else have we got? Now, I'll tell you what, let's do the is there any more Eagles questions we've got in the chat very, very quickly? Because then we'll get to... I can see one final Eagles one. Chances that Kellen Moore becomes Eagles head coach in 2025. I'm going low because as much as I said it happens, it very, very rarely works. I think it's very controversial. And it sort of means the offense did well as well and Sirianni still lost his job. So I'd go like, I don't know, like 1 in 100, 1%. I think it's very, very unlikely. Would you agree?
Yeah, the number I had in mind was 2%. I don't see how the team does poorly enough to fire Sirianni and yet good enough to retain Kellen Moore and promote him. So I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, it'd be pretty tough. Right, we're going to go non-Eagles now very quickly. Let's start with, I'm just looking at the list. Let's do the football one before we go non-football. I did actually have to think about this way too much, and I've got I've got maybe a couple of answers. The NFL decides to restart a fantasy draft that excludes QBs from the draft. You have the 1 overall pick. Who are you taking? And if you're in the chat, please put your answers in there as well. I want you to start because I'm nervous about this one. So who are you taking number 1 overall in a fantasy draft with no... And I take it, by the way, this means like it's not a fantasy. This means real football, right? So you can take defensive players, offensive players.
Correct,
who are you taking in the draft number 1 overall with no QBs?
Yeah, fantasy draft is just like everybody's in a draft pool to draft from, excluding quarterbacks. I actually kind of wanted you to go first because I think there's only 4 answers that are acceptable. And I was hoping you would pick one that was not on my list of 4 so I can yell at you about it. But
so do you want to hear the top 2 that came to my mind straight away then?
Yes.
The top 2 were Justin Jefferson.
Okay, you're good there.
And Micah Parsons.
You're good there. Those are both on my list of 4.
Okay, then I sort of wanted to selfishly say Jalen Carter, but I think it's too early for that, so I didn't put him in there. But I don't think he's miles away. I'll be honest, I'm rubbish at names around the league, so I was looking at some of the best offensive linemen. Is one of yours an offensive tackle by any chance?
Yes.
And is it the Bucks guy?
No.
Is it? Who's the other young offensive tackle that everyone talks about? Who's your offensive tackle? Yes, that was the one I had. I promise you.
Tristan Wirfs also very good. You could make an argument for Wirfs. I like Sewell.
Yeah, I see Mr. Crockpot put Sauce Gardner in there. I didn't count him because I just can't take a corner.
That's my 4th.
Is he your 4th? I just can't do it. I'm burned too much of secondary play. I think it's too inconsistent. I want a pass rusher. It's a horrible answer. Mine might be Micah Parsons. I just think Parsons is unbelievable, and it's also a horrible answer for Eagles fans because they could have had him. And I called him a slot-only receiver, and I deserve all the hate I get because I was wrong about Justin Jefferson playing outside. I think I might take Justin Jefferson. Like as wild as it sounds, take a receiver. I just think he's unbelievable. And mine would be Jefferson or Parsons. So you've given us your 4, but if you had to take one, who would your one be if you had to take one?
I think I'm taking Sauce Gardner.
Wow, that's a terrible take. You're taking Sauce over. No, I think I take Jalen Carr over Sauce Gardner. Honestly, I think I take Jalen Carr over him.
He's only 23 years old. Cornerback is probably the most unstable position in football year to year. And Sauce Gardner is ranked first and second in yards allowed per coverage snap in back-to-back seasons. And that just doesn't happen.
Is he that good?
And he's also, like, if you get into the advanced analytics for, like, they do the graphs of, like, separation allowed and catch point metrics, and he's been at, like, the top of all of those in back-to-back seasons. So
right.
I think if you could, and so my thought is getting an elite corner is hard. Getting an elite corner that is consistent year over year, that just doesn't happen. There's those ebbs and flows. And I look at the other guys like Justin Jefferson, and he's phenomenal, but there's such a glut of wide receiver talent. Like, I think you can go get wide receivers. We see wide receivers get drafted and contribute right away, even though, obviously not at Justin Jefferson's level. Micah Parsons, like, a lot of me wants to go pass rusher. Myles Garrett, I saw Eagles Eric mention, but he's 28, and that's a little older than what I want to start my franchise around. And so I think for me, I would probably go Sauce Gardner 1, and I think Penei Sewell would be my number 2.
I think Sauce Gardner over Micah Parsons is a horrible, horrible take. But there you go. We don't disagree much. Kyle Hamilton's an interesting shout, but yeah, in Madden he's worse than Kevin Byard, so you wouldn't want him. Because Kevin Byard is actually better than Kyle Hamilton. And you're now going to tweet that as a clip as well, so I'm going to stop talking. Let's move on to non-Eagles ones then, totally random. So if you don't like us talking about anything but football, just turn off the last 4 minutes of the pod. We'll rush through these very quickly. But we've done a hell of a lot of Eagles NFL talk. I'm interested to see this, Shane, because we don't talk anything about football because we're boring people. We talk a little bit off air, obviously. We're not just football friends, I guess. We talk a little bit about life, about like culture. So Mount Rushmore of TV shows, and I'm going to embarrass myself here and just clarify that Mount Rushmore is 4. It's like the 4 heads, isn't it?
Yes,
I'm
yes,
correct. As the Brit.
That's a bit of a cultural question here. So good job, Johnny, on that one. It's 4. So give me 4 of your favorite TV shows.
So I actually think are 3 of them set in America, possibly. I would go. So I think my top 4, mine are all probably quite serious. Like I like funny shows, like everyone, but I'd probably go a bit more serious. I would go The Wire, number 1. No, that is set in Baltimore. Breaking Bad, number 2. That is also set, isn't it, in the States somewhere? Breaking Bad. It's like about Mexico and Mexican Kyle, isn't it? Yep. Number 3, Homeland. Is a lot of like CIA involved. Like the first few series are unbelievable. Then it just goes total nonsense. But I love the first 3 episodes. Like I love Damian Lewis.
The first season of Homeland is maybe the best TV show I've ever watched.
Unbelievove. Then it went.
I also never finished Homeland because it became rubbish.
It's utterly awful. But I had to watch it because I love her. The main character, she's brilliant. Just a complete car crash of a human by the end of it. Just doesn't know what the hell is going on. Like it's fantastic. And then the last one, it's not. I think I have to put it in there because it's just. I was stuck between 2. I was stuck between Lost, which was an old school TV show I watched years ago with these like survivors. There's a plane crash. If I had 5, but apparently this Mount Rushmore thing has 4, so I'm going to go with Game of Thrones. Bit like cliche, bit traditional, but I love Game of Thrones. I haven't watched Ted Lasso, by the way, Mr. Crockpot. So I went. So my 4, if you're keeping track at home, The Wire, Breaking Bad, Homeland, and Game of Thrones. Where are you going?
3 for 4 with Mr. Crockpot here.
Yeah, I know. Good taste.
Hot
very
take.
Good taste.
The last season of Ted Lasso ruined the whole series. It was awful. I thought the last season. Ted Lasso now. I loved Ted Lasso until the last season, and I thought it was quite bad there. But
yeah, just quickly, this is a bit of the depressing culture take, but like I used to watch way more TV before I did this as a second job. Like I used to actually watch a lot more just fun stuff in the evenings rather than grinding like the Eagles All 22 on a Tuesday evening. But me and my wife do try and still watch a bit of TV here and there when I'm not constantly watching sports. So I watch less TV than I ever used to. But those are some really good programs. Yep.
I'll go. So Breaking Bad is one of mine. Parks and Rec is up there. Sitcom show. Similar like style of humor to like the American version of The Office. But I like Parks and Rec a lot. For its pure longevity and the fact I've literally been watching the show almost my entire life, I'm going to go with Survivor. It's had like 45 seasons, 2 seasons a year. The show first came out when I was in 6th grade, and I remember like every Friday we would always sit around and talk about it at lunch because it aired on Thursday nights. And like I've watched every season, applied to be on the show multiple times. Never get those callbacks because I'm not interesting enough, I guess. But if there's any CBS executives out there, put me on Survivor. It'll be great. And then for my last one, I don't know if it counts or not because it's technically a mini series. It's only like, I think it's 8 or maybe it's 12 episodes, but Band of Brothers. Have you ever watched Band of Brothers? So if Band of Brothers counts, that's definitely on my Mount Rushmore. If Band of Brothers doesn't count, then Lost is probably my 4th one, or maybe like 24, although it tailed off in the later seasons too, but I loved 24. So depending on the ruling from the internet people about Band of Brothers, I have Breaking Bad, Parks and Rec, Survivor, and Band of Brothers is my Mount Rushmore.
We're actually quite similar culturally. More shout-outs in the chat. The chat is too much for me to keep up with. But Mindhunters, I couldn't believe Netflix cancelled it. I'm like every white male in their late 20s who loves like crime podcasts and crime shows. Like True Detective's another one. Like I'm like every one of that genre. I'm like every cliche about a man my age that likes a crime podcast. Yeah, Mindhunters was absolutely brilliant. Right, let's move on from TV shows before this becomes a purely TV mailbag. 2 more, but only 1 more for you, Shane, because the last one's all me. What is your favorite Olympic event to watch? Which is a good question because the Olympics are on. Hot take, I don't care. Now, I don't care about the Olympics. I love the Olympics. My hot take is I don't care about the event. Like, basically, the Olympics to me is like background music. And that sounds terrible because there's like elite athletes. And I think you Americans like it more than us over here, probably because you've got too many people, so you win everything. It's not really a fair race when you got more people than we do. But anyway, so my Olympic event is like I'm in a pub, which we'll come on to in a minute. Like I'm having a drink, having a music. Like there's just Olympics on in the background. Like that's my dream. Like I don't really want to get invested. Like obviously the 100 meters is great, but like I would watch anything. Like literally stick anything on. And I've got a drink. It's in the background. I'm talking to mates, and the Olympics. That's what the Olympics is great for. I was actually in Dublin last week in Ireland, and obviously Dublin, if anyone does not know, is known for having amazing pubs. And I was sitting there drinking a Guinness, and there was just the opening ceremony in the background on for like 3 hours, and I was like, "What is going on?" No, the opening ceremony was absolutely nuts, but it fit perfectly with the vibe in the pub. So I don't have a favorite Olympic event. There's a terrible hot take for you, Shane. There is not one event I will ever tune in for. I will just put on the TV, and if it's on, then it is on. You seem disgusted with that take. So
No, that's fine.
What is your favorite Olympic event?
As long as you said it didn't matter because you just watch them. If you were just like the Olympics are dumb, then I would have been offended. For me, it's men's indoor volleyball. I played club volleyball throughout college, and there's not a lot of times you get to watch like indoor volleyball outside of the Olympics. So I always enjoy watching that. The kids have been sick, so we've been laying on the couch and watching a lot of the Olympics the last few days. And I mean, we've watched everything: swimming, diving, track and field, gymnastics. Like each kid kind of has their own favorites, but they all have gotten into the volleyball because I can explain to them what's happening. So we watched the U.S. men beat, spoiler alert, Brazil yesterday in the quarterfinals. They play Poland tomorrow in the semifinals, and we've like got the alarm set for that to make sure we don't miss the start. So I will watch literally anything on the Olympics, but men's volleyball is my sweet spot.
All right, you're way more into it than me. You are way more into it than me. Yeah, that's also the most like white man answer I've ever heard is men's looking like cliche, but that's even worse. Anyway, right, let's finish. That was good fun. I'm going to end with one last question, which was an incredibly good question. So shout out Angry Kook on Twitter, who tweeted that said, when people buy you a beer on your page, what pub is your favorite? And full disclaimer, for about 2 years, I've had like a buy me a coffee or buy me a beer thing pinned to my Twitter. It's almost like a little donation, I guess, If people don't want to subscribe, I mean, I've never had subscription until we've launched Patreon. I've always been sort of working for Bleeding Green. But if anyone wanted to say thank you and buy me a beer, I withdrew some funds and it was contributed to my beer funds in Dublin last week, which was awesome. And he said, we were in England last summer and we liked the look of a lot of pubs, but after a few, we realized that many were either part of Green King or Fuller's, and we had to look for independent ones. This is a great shout because the UK beer scene is really good. Like, I love an English pub. I'm very British. I spend a lot of my time just chilling in pubs. I'll go to pubs solo and just like work there. But there are Green King and Fuller's are taking over, and it's a shame. So independent pubs. I'll rattle through this in like 30 seconds. Shame if anyone's ever coming over to the UK. And I know some people do. I've actually met a friend of the show who's come over to the UK once before. So if you do ever come over on business, let me know. I'll give you some recommendations. A couple of ones that I love. So I have a set for London. I don't know if this is not the same in America and Canada because I've been to both. And people always sit down in American and Canadian pubs when I was there. Whereas in London, we like to stand outside in the freezing cold of our beer. Like standing outside the pub and freezing is like the traditional British way. So if you want to stand outside and have a beer, the Neil Gwyn is brilliant for that. It's like a very traditional English pub. It stinks of like, it's like down the little side of near Covent Garden. It's down like a little, you can smell like the drains and it's proper like tiny, but it's really cool. If you want to stand out overlooking the River Thames, the Horniman, great name as well, in London Bridge is class because you can stand outside and overlook the Thames. History teacher here, history buff. Prospect Whitby in Wapping is about 1520. I think the pub began. And if you sit outside and have a drink over the river, there's also like a noose. There's like a fake noose hanging out over the beach as if someone's about to get hanged, which is pretty cool. They're 3 cool recommendations. I live with my 2 favorite pubs in London though. The Porterhouse near Charing Cross or Covent Garden is just an awesome pub. MC and Sons is a brilliant Irish pub as well. And I'll give a very random shout out. If you ever want to have a little bit of fun, there is something, Shane, called the Bermondsey Beer Mile, which is basically in Bermondsey, which is like a little bit of a hipster part of London. And you can essentially do, I don't know how many pubs actually, I can't remember, which is a sign of a good night, the Bermondsey Beer Mile. But there is, I'm Googling it frantically now, there is like a number of different pubs. I think there's about 13 or so pubs all along a mile. And you literally start it and finish it along the mile. It's a straight line. And they're all like very hipster pubs with loads of different great craft beer. So if you ever want a very good night in London, it's a little bit different. To the Bermondsey Beer Mile, you will not regret it. So we'll finish our mailbag there, Shane. Anyone coming over to the London has ever been before, please treat me your recommendations. I'm very British. I like hearing it when you lot come over to visit. But yeah, there's some good independent pubs if you are in the region anytime soon.
All right. Well, there you have it, our mailbag. Johnny, we made it through the off season. The next time the people hear our voices,
wow,
all 22, as long as it works, we'll be doing an all 22 film breakdown from the preseason, assuming we're able to get our hands on the footage with the Eagles have their first game on Friday night. We'll be back next week to break down what we saw from all 22, hopefully. If not, we'll just have to talk generally from broadcast copy, but we'll see what we're able to get to. Thank you guys for tuning in to the show. If you are not following us on Patreon and you would like to, you can check that out at patreon.com/ontheshanepage. There is a $3 and a $5 tier. And again, it gets you an ad-free podcast feed for this show. It also gets you access to a Discord, access to these mailbags once they go Patreon exclusive later this year. You'll get to vote in player spotlight polls. Regardless, if you don't want to do that, you can still support us and get all of our content absolutely for free by subscribing to the Eagles Pinpool Network. We have 6 shows that will be airing each week as the season starts. We will have a live post-game show after the game on Friday night that'll go out on Twitter and YouTube. It'll post in this podcast feed. And then our 6th show will be the Armchair Scouts, which will start near the end of the month of August alongside the college football season. So there's something for everybody, whether you're a film nerd, whether you're a football noob, we've got you covered with all the stuff. So be sure you check that out. Leave us 5-star ratings and reviews. We really appreciate it. And we will catch you guys next week when we actually have preseason football film to talk about. Till next time, go Birds.